Welcome to CBC Windsor News at 6. I'm Meg Roberts. Thanks so much for spending part of your evening with us tonight. Thousands of Canadians, including some here in Windsor, are being threatened with legal action for allegedly file sharing a Ryan Reynolds movie online. And fundraising efforts are happening in Windsor as we speak. That's to help people from Libya and Morocco following major natural disasters. We check in on the event. Plus, big three U.S. car makers are bracing for a potential strike as they reach the final hours of negotiation. Tonight in studio, we have an exclusive interview with the Ambassador of Canada to the United States. Tonight, Windsorites are fundraising for people living in Libya and Morocco. As many as 20,000 people may be dead in Libya after damaging flooding, and even more people were killed in a massive earthquake in Morocco. Islamic Relief Canada is raising money at the Chicharo Club tonight. That's where we find the CBC's TJ Deer. TJ, we've been seeing pictures of what is happening across the world, and it's heartbreaking. I would have to imagine a lot of people out fundraising tonight are feeling the same.
Yeah, Meg, there are a lot of heavy hearts here at the Chicharo Club, especially given what we've seen over the last few days in Northwest Africa. One person I spoke with earlier told me that what they hope will happen here tonight is a reflection of Windsor, Essex, in that in sadness there is happiness and hopefully a generosity to give. Now, obviously, devastating scenes in Northwest Africa. According to the Associated Press, the flooding in Libya has swept away entire families in the coastal city of Derna, which is the worst hit part of Libya. The death toll in Derna is more than 11,000 people. Meanwhile, rescue crews in Morocco are continuing to pull people from the rubble after Friday's earthquake and subsequent aftershocks. Joining me now is Aliyah Samser, who's a fundraising coordinator with the Islamic Relief Fund. Aliyah, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Why is it important for you to hold fundraisers like this here in Windsor?
So these fundraisers are crucial for our community to take part in and also participate in, because these sort of tragedies can strike anywhere. Something like a flood or an earthquake can hit almost anywhere in the world. And we would only hope and pray that if something like this was to happen to us, that there would be someone out there that would be raising support, trying to help us. This could be our own mothers, our fathers, our children. So bringing that here into Windsor is just our way of showing our love and support to those in Libya and Morocco.
And how do you hope the funds raised tonight will help with the relief efforts over there?
So right now we're actually on the ground in Morocco and Libya. We're working with local partners to help bring things like food, shelters, tent, hygiene kits, these sort of basic necessities to help basically alleviate some of that suffering and pain as much as we can. So tonight we're hoping to raise funds to provide more of these necessities.
Yeah, and we've already seen a lot of people here gather. Thanks so much for joining us, Aliyah. Really appreciate it. So obviously, really, like I said earlier, heavy hearts, but hopefully happiness, joy, and hopefully a willingness to give. And that's what it's like here at the Chicharo Club. Meg?
Well, thanks so much for that, TJ. That's the CBC's TJ Deer. A Ryan Reynolds movie has thousands of Canadians on the hook for alleged copyright infringement. Legal action is being pursued for file sharing The Hitman's Wife. It's one of several such actions being taken across the country on behalf of content creators. In recent years, the CBC's Jacob Barker now joins me live on set. Jacob, we know of one Windsorite who's currently part of the legal action. What will this mean for them?
Well, Meg, this is what the Cogeco customer here in the area received. It's a statement of claim, and if you flip it to the back here, you'll see a list, and this is just over 1,900 IP addresses, each representing someone or some entity that the lawyer and the business behind this lawsuit say were illegally file sharing 2021's Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard. That movie is starring, amongst others, Canada's own Ryan Reynolds. This means this person is being sued for copyright infringement and could pay up to $50,000 if it is proven in a federal court.
So, Jacob, I went online to Amazon. You can buy this movie for $15. $50,000 is pretty steep.
It is a lot of money, but nobody expects a payout of $50,000 in cases such as these. I spoke with Kenneth Clark, the lawyer who is representing Hitman 2 Productions, the company that owns the rights to Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard. He says typically cases are resolved somewhere between the minimum and the maximum. Hardcore infringers would be more at the maximum, and in cases where it seems people's internet has been stolen or something like that, they would just dismiss the case. He says that streaming apps for free TV and Android boxes are mostly to blame for these types of transgressions, but it all has to do with file sharing. So it's not about downloading a movie, but rather having the file available for others to for others to download using the internet. Clark has brought numerous lawsuits such as these forward across the country, defending intellectual property owners from infringement such as this. He says that people get 2 warnings through their internet service providers before they go ahead and sue. He wants to show people that internet piracy does have consequences.
So, Jacob, has there been any opposition to this?
Yeah, there absolutely has. I did speak with a lawyer who has intervened in these types of cases brought by Clark in the past. He says that more than 10,000 people in Canada have been sued by Clark on behalf of different clients for BitTorrent file sharing, and that in some cases there have been settlements in the thousands. He doesn't take issue with the fact that Clark is bringing copyright infringement cases, but it's the way that he's doing it.
What's being monetized here isn't actually the copyright infringement. Our view is that if a judge ever got to issue damages, for the infringement, it would be a relatively low amount. This is just, these are just sharing movies. This is not, stealing cars or anything in that vicinity. And what's really happening in my view is that kind of the fear and the uncertainty of being sued in federal court is what's being monetized here.
Okay, so if a stack of paper like the one you're holding in your hand comes to you in the mail, what should you do?
Well, someone who gets papers like these should think about whether or not they have been file sharing. And if they have, they very well could be found guilty if it goes to court. But they should also take stock of just what is being asked of them. And if they're asked for an amount of money to settle the case that makes them uncomfortable, according to a lawyer I spoke with at Pro Bono Ontario, they should push back.
We want them to be aware of the potential for civil liability, but not to feel scared or intimidated by this.
That charity, by the way, has received about 500 calls on matters such as these in the past few years. They do provide free legal advice to low-income Canadians and could be somewhere to turn for someone who might have found themselves in a predicament such as this and are unsure of what to do.
Well, thanks so much for that, Jacob. That's the CBC's Jacob Barker. Today, a tribute from nurses in Windsor who wanted to say their final goodbyes to an exemplary colleague. Franca DiPietro died suddenly last Wednesday at the age of 49. She was an ICU nurse at Windsor Regional Hospital. This was at St. Angela Merici Church this morning. A burial was held this afternoon at Windsor Memorial Gardens. DiPietro is survived by her husband, 4 children, 5 stepchildren, and 4 grandkids. The province has contributed more than $2 million toward new equipment at Cavalier Tool and Manufacturing Limited. The money has gone towards millions of dollars worth of robotic and computerized equipment that makes it more efficient to cut molds for producing parts through plastic injection.
The robot allows this cell to run around the clock, 24/7, 365, maintaining the spindles of the machines with product to machine. So it's basically a giant loading and unloading and putting it away. There is some artificial intelligence built into it as well, but it's basically servicing 3 5-axis CNC machines.
Cavalier president says applying the assembly line technique to the production of plastic injection molds allows them to be more efficient. The process allows one person to do the job of 3 people, in turn producing more molds. But they've also had to hire more people to work on the new equipment. Provincial Industry Minister Vic Fedeli was also on hand today to make the announcement. He responded to a report from the Federal Parliamentary Budget Officer that was released earlier this week. It stated it will take the federal government 20 years to break even on subsidies pledged to the Nexstar and Volkswagen plants.
Not like we're writing them a check. It is a tax credit. So if you don't do the business, you don't get any money in from it. If you do this deal, you get money in 10 years from them or 20 years from them. But meantime, each have spent billions of dollars of investment. Each have hired thousands of people. Volkswagen alone, the tens of thousands of spin-off jobs. Each of those plants now needs somebody to supply them with cathode and anode and separators and all the components. Those are all multi-billion-dollar companies that are coming. He did not acknowledge all of the spin-off jobs and all of the other companies that are now coming to Ontario to supply those companies.
Still no deal between the United Auto Workers Union across the border and the Detroit 3 automakers. And that deadline is coming up quick. They have until midnight tonight. The union is demanding a 36% boost in pay. General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis have countered with offers that are roughly half of that increase. If an agreement isn't reached, it would be the first time in the union's 80-year history that all three Detroit companies have employees off on strike at the exact same time. I don't have to tell our audience how deeply connected Windsor and Detroit are, having the busiest land border crossing in North America, and that's only expanding with the new Gordie Howe International Bridge set to be finished next year, which allows our economies to be interconnected as well, especially the auto sector. As we mentioned, there's a strike looming at midnight tonight among the Detroit 3 car makers, which would be the first time all three simultaneously strike if a deal isn't reached soon. To talk more about all of this, we're joined by Kirsten Hillman, Ambassador of Canada to the United States. Well, thanks so much for joining us for this exclusive Canadian interview.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Let's start with the possible strike. How much of an impact do you think a strike would have on people here in Canada?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said in your opening remarks, the auto sector is deeply important to this region, to Windsor, to this whole corridor. And so it will have an impact on people. It certainly will. That's why we're watching it really closely. I've had updates actually all throughout the day on how it is developing both in Canada and in the United States. And I talked to the Governor Whitmer, about it just earlier today. So we're watching it really carefully. But ultimately, you know, we really do respect the collective bargaining process. It's going to have to play itself out. But hopefully, you know, everybody will be able to come to a solution as soon as possible.
During your time in Washington, in your role as ambassador, how often does the Windsor-Detroit region kind of come up in terms of conversation?
Well, a lot. That's what I can tell you. So, you know, the reason I'm here for a 3-day visit in the region is because what is happening in this region is a powerhouse in the Canada-US relationship. It truly is. So you said again earlier that it's 25% of the border crossings between our two countries. That's incredible, right? That's an incredible amount of economic activity, of person-to-person ties. And so I'm exploring all of that. I'm exploring what we're doing now. I've been to the Battery Show. I've been to the Auto Show. I'm going to be doing some activities on the Great Lakes. As I said, I talked to the governor, to the mayor here. I've been to the bridge, the Gordie Howe Bridge, to have a look at how that's coming along. Because what is happening here is not only exciting and consequential, but it is also one of the priorities for our two governments.
You mentioned that you were at the site of the Gordie Howe International Bridge earlier today. There have been concerns about staying on budget and also staying on a timeline. From what you've seen, how likely is that to happen?
Well, I think it is in really good shape. I was saying to you a minute ago before we started that the last time I saw the Gordie Howe Bridge, it was 2017, and it wasn't a bridge. It was a trailer and some plans that I was looking at. So to see the physical manifestation of the Canada-US relationship through the construction of that bridge is incredible. Look, everybody knows COVID disrupted our lives in all kinds of ways, and no project and no economic activity, unfortunately, was kept from those kinds of effects. But we're confident. We talked to the leadership today, and we're confident that they're on track. You know, we'll have some discussions around the timelines and the effects and of the COVID supply chain challenges. But we're going to see that bridge. We're going to see it soon. And it's going to be magnificent.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here in studio.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
That's Kirsten Hillman joining us for an exclusive Canadian interview. She's the Ambassador of Canada to the United States. Well, there's a boil water advisory for Wheatley and Tilbury. That's because of a fire at a water treatment plant. Residents are being told to boil their water for at least a minute before drinking it or using it to brush their teeth. That's coming from the Chatham-Kent Medical Officer of Health. Officials say that fire broke out in the generator room yesterday afternoon. No injuries have been reported. A Canadian man has been arrested by U.S. law enforcement after allegedly swimming across the St. Clair River from Sombra, a small community north of Walpole Island. The man then walked into a pawn shop and stole a gun. He was wearing a wetsuit and fins while swimming. That's according to a Michigan court. Law enforcement alleges he was armed with a crossbow, pistol, and hammer, as well as 9 rounds of ammunition. Sunny skies out there this evening to follow a beautiful day. Our friends out on the East Coast not getting so lucky as they prepare for Hurricane Lee. We have your weather forecast coming up after the break. Colette, we're looking at some beautiful weather tonight into the weekend. I don't even need you to say that, but which is good news for us here. But I know some on the East Coast won't get so lucky, and they're in for a bit of a tough weekend. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about Hurricane Lee and what we're going to see? Are we going to see any impacts of that hurricane?
Yeah, sure, Meg, and we'll focus in on that and the tiny bit of impact it might have on Eastern Ontario, which is nothing compared to what's going on for Atlantic Canada as we get into the weekend. So it's a very broad, and it's actually going to be getting even wider, this hurricane. So Category 1 at the moment, strong Category Category 1, passing to the west of Bermuda. But that wind field, it goes out, the hurricane force winds are about 165 kilometers wide, but the tropical storm force about just over 550 kilometers. So that gives you an idea. The wind's 140 kilometers an hour. It is tracking northward at between 20 and 25, but then it's going to turn a little bit to the northeast. And so they'll start feeling the effects of it. Already they are along the eastern seaboard, but into Atlantic Canada Friday night. The main impact is going to be through Saturday and then even a little bit of residual into Sunday. And you can see that timeline. So coming in either as a weaker Category 1 hurricane or tropical storm and then becoming post-tropical. But in terms of what they can expect there, rainfall, there'll be certain areas localized, could be seeing over 100 millimeters of rain. Those winds up to 120 kilometers an hour, some of the gusts, and the wave heights 4 to 6 meters. So flooding, yes, a concern, but also power outages, especially through parts of Nova Scotia. Some really vulnerable spots with that power grid there. But then here we are benefiting with some really nice conditions as this ridge of high pressure has moved in. It's kind of stabilizing and keeping everything nice for us. I mean, the daytime highs, they're pleasant, a little cool in the morning, but you kind of adjust. It just takes a little time, right? So here we are into the clearing skies tonight, and that's what we benefit from through the day tomorrow. And this is where I'm going to take you into the computer models and show you a couple of things going on. So Friday, no concerns. We do have a front approaching from the west as we're going into Saturday. Late day Saturday, we'll get more cloud cover. But you see this cloud, this is high thin cloud backing into eastern Ontario. That will be the outskirts of what will be Hurricane Lee, or what's left with it. But that's about all we see into this province. Otherwise, we do get into a heightened chance for some very scattered showers as we go into Saturday night and Sunday. Still, most of the weekend looks okay, but especially the first half. Overnight temperatures 8 to 9 degrees for that low, and some really cool numbers there. Kitchener towards London as well. But then we get to warm up to 22, even milder on Saturday, 23, looking very good. And then once that front goes through, we get the chance for not just showers, a few thunderstorms, and the temperature comes down a tiny bit, Meg.
Colin, of course, we're hoping for the best on the East Coast, but as somebody who lived out there for multiple years, they are used to the storms, they're well prepared, and they got the spirits for it as well.
Yeah, I know that. I know that about those communities, so that's amazing. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Colette. NASA has just wrapped up a year-long study into UFOs. We tell you those results coming up. new report from Ontario Public Health shows an alarming jump in accidental drug and alcohol deaths during the COVID-19 pandemic. Nearly 9,000 fatalities in a 4-year period, and close to double the amount of overdose deaths in 2021 compared to 2018. CBC's Tashana Reid has more on the story.
Takes them out of withdrawal.
Yes.
Kyle Arnold is on the front lines of the opioid crisis in Thunder Bay. He's a coordinator for a drop-in program for people most vulnerable.
When we first started using naloxone, it'd be 2, maybe 3 naloxones. Now we're up to 9 with some of the overdoses.
Fentanyl mixed with benzodiazepines is fueling overdoses in the community. The combination of drugs makes treatment more complex. Naloxone, which helps reverse the effects of opioid overdose, isn't always as effective.
I have to explain to the staff that every time you use those naloxones, just because they're not popping up and their eyes aren't open, doesn't mean they're not breathing, because that benzo is still sedating them so much.
A new report found that after the pandemic began, across Ontario, overdose deaths from multiple substances surpassed deaths from one substance. Researchers analyzed coroner reports of accidental drug overdoses involving alcohol, stimulants, opioids, and benzodiazepine between 2018 and 2021.
The changing drug supply is leading to sometimes people being exposed to many different substances that they don't know they're being exposed to, and that can increase the harm for them.
The combination of opioids and stimulants, such as cocaine or methamphetamines, contributed to the most overdose deaths during that period. The report says most of the deaths are men between 25 and 44 and lower income, and about 3/4 of deaths of all substances happened in private residences.
The stigma that comes with drug use also leads people to hide it, to use substances when they're in their own homes, alone in their bedrooms, and when if something bad happens, there's nobody there to intervene.
Researchers also found that substance-related death rates were almost 3 times higher in Northern Ontario. Experts say limited access to treatment programs for people in rural communities is an issue.
When we looked at how far people with opiate use disorder travel to get treatment, in Northern Ontario, the average was 124 kilometers compared to 16 kilometers in Southern Ontario.
Researchers say opioid-related deaths have dropped slightly, but death rates are still far above pre-pandemic levels. Advocates want investment in more treatment beds and access to a safe drug supply. Tashana Reid, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, NASA released the findings today of a year-long study into unidentified flying objects. The top takeaway, there's a lot more to learn, but it did say this.
The NASA independent study team did not find any evidence that UAP have an extraterrestrial origin, but we don't know what these UAP are. That's why I'm announcing that NASA has appointed a NASA Director of UAP Research.
NASA said there are so few high-quality observations that no scientific conclusions can be drawn. It says it wants to shift the conversation from sensationalism to science. Well, that's it for CBC Windsor News. Don't forget, for news anytime, you can go to our website at cbc.ca/Windsor. You can also download the CBC News app for stories that matter most to you. And tonight on The National, Japan has increased its defense budget amid growing tension with China. As regional relationships are tested, Canada is becoming a more important security partner to Japan than ever before. David Common continues our special coverage from Asia Pacific on The National tonight at 9 Eastern on CBC News Network and the CBC News app, 10 p.m. on CBC TV and streaming on CBC Gem and CBC News Explore. Thanks so much for tuning in. Looking forward to seeing you back here tomorrow night.